The letter had no stamp, no return address, no postmark, no sign that it had ever traveled through the ordinary world. Yet every year, on the first quiet morning of October, it appeared inside the same weathered mailbox at the end of Willow Lane. The mailbox belonged to an old woman named Eleanor Brooks. For 23 years, the impossible letter arrived without fail. Every year, the handwriting was exactly the same. Every year, the paper smelled faintly of lavender and rain. And every year, the final sentence remained unchanged. "I'll write again next autumn." The only impossible part was that the man who signed the letter had been buried beneath an oak tree 23 years ago. The first letter arrived on a cold October morning. The maple trees had only just begun to surrender their leaves, painting Willow Lane with shades of amber, copper, and soft gold. The air smelled of damp earth, chimney smoke, and distant rain drifting in from the hills. Eleanor woke before sunrise, just as she always did. She was 70 years old then, though she never admitted the number aloud. She preferred to measure life differently, by the number of books she had reread, by the number of winters she had watched from the same kitchen window, by the number of mornings she still found beauty in making tea for one. She wrapped a knitted shawl around her shoulders and opened the front door. The morning greeted her with silence. Not an empty silence, the comforting kind. Birdsong floated somewhere high in the trees. A squirrel darted across the old stone fence. Mist rested gently above the small creek beyond her garden. Then she noticed it. The mailbox door was slightly open. That was unusual. No mail was delivered before 8. She walked slowly down the narrow stone path. The mailbox had belonged to her father before her. It was painted dark green once. Time had faded it into something softer. Inside rested a single envelope. Cream-colored, thick paper, no stamp, no address. Only one word written carefully across the front. Eleanor. Her breath caught. She knew that handwriting. Not because she had seen it recently, because some handwriting never leaves your memory, especially when you once waited for it every week. She stood perfectly still. The morning breeze stirred the maple leaves around her feet. For a long time, she simply looked at the envelope. She already knew who had written it. That was impossible. Yet certainty arrived before reason had the chance to argue. With trembling fingers, she opened it. Inside rested a single sheet folded twice. The paper carried the faint scent of lavender. She unfolded it carefully. The ink was dark blue. Every letter shaped with the same patient care she remembered from decades before. "My dearest Eleanor, if this letter has found you, then autumn has arrived once again. I hope the maple tree still turns golden before the others. I hope the little robin still steals berries from your garden before sunrise. And I hope, more than anything, that you are remembering to laugh. You always worried too much, even when we were young, especially then. Do you remember the bench beside the river? The one where you insisted the world smelled different after rain? You were right, it always did. I miss that smell. I'll write again next autumn." Always, Thomas Eleanor lowered the paper slowly. The world around her had become strangely quiet. Not because the birds had stopped singing, because memory had become louder than the present. Thomas Hale, her husband, the man whose funeral the entire village had attended 23 years earlier. The man she had held until his final breath in the small hospital overlooking the river. The man whose grave she visited every Sunday morning with fresh white flowers. She folded the letter carefully, then unfolded it again. Perhaps she had imagined the signature. She had not. It remained exactly where it had been. Always Thomas. A breeze lifted the corner of the page. Eleanor looked toward the empty road. No mail truck, no footsteps, no children playing tricks. Only quiet morning. She looked back at the envelope. No return address, no stamp, nothing. Only her name. Written exactly as Thomas had always written it. Not Eleanor Brooks, not Mrs. Brooks. Simply Eleanor, the way only one person in the world had ever managed to write it. She carried the letter inside with both hands, as though paper could bruise. The kitchen still smelled of tea leaves and cinnamon. Sunlight slowly entered through the lace curtains, touching the old wooden table where she had shared thousands of breakfasts with Thomas. She sat in his chair without realizing it. The letter rested between her hands. 23 years. She had spent 23 years learning how to live beside absence, not overcoming it. No one truly overcomes the loss of a great love. They simply become better at carrying it. Some mornings the weight felt lighter. Some mornings it felt newly impossible. She had built an entire life around continuing. She tended the roses he planted. She baked his favorite bread every Sunday, though she could never finish it alone. She still spoke aloud while watering the garden, mostly small things. The tomatoes are finally growing. The robin has returned. The first frost came early this year. She never expected answers. Speaking simply made silence feel kinder. Now, a letter rested before her, one that should not exist. She read it again, then again. Each sentence felt ordinary. That frightened her most. There were no grand declarations, no impossible revelations. Only Thomas, gentle, observant, exactly as he had always been. Outside, somewhere beyond the kitchen window, church bells marked 8 o'clock. The mail truck finally entered Willow Lane. Eleanor watched it pass her house. The postman waved cheerfully. She waved back automatically. He never stopped. There was nothing left to deliver. Because somehow, someone already had. Eleanor did not tell anyone about the letter. Not the neighbors who greeted her every morning. Not the librarian who always saved the newest novels for her. Not even Father Michael, who had listened patiently to 23 years of quiet grief without ever pretending to understand it completely. Some things feel too impossible when spoken aloud. They become smaller, more fragile, as though another person's disbelief might somehow erase them. So she folded the letter carefully and placed it inside the old wooden box where she had kept Thomas's wedding band after he died. The ring had become too large for her own hand years ago. Time changes even the places where love once rested. For several days, she tried convincing herself there had been an explanation. Perhaps someone had copied Thomas's handwriting. Perhaps an old letter had somehow been delayed. Perhaps memory itself had become unreliable. But every explanation collapsed beneath one simple truth. The paper was new. The ink had not faded. And the sentence, "I hope the maple tree still turns golden before the others." No one else knew about the maple tree. Not really. Years before they married, Thomas had planted 2 young maples beside the garden. Everyone said they would grow the same. They never did. One always welcomed autumn nearly a week before the other. Every September, Thomas would smile toward the first golden leaves and quietly announce, "Our impatient tree has arrived." It became a tradition. Every autumn, they stood together beneath those branches with 2 warm cups of tea. They never invited anyone. It belonged only to them. No visitor could have guessed. No neighbor ever noticed. Yet the letter knew. On Sunday morning, Eleanor carried fresh white lilies to the cemetery. She always arrived before the village woke fully. Mist drifted between the old stones. Birds perched silently upon weathered crosses. The world seemed to whisper instead of speak. Thomas rested beneath a great oak overlooking the river valley. Exactly where he had once joked he wanted to spend eternity because it's the best view in the county. She smiled despite herself. "You were right," she whispered. The grass around the stone had grown thick after recent rain. She knelt slowly, replacing last week's flowers with the fresh bouquet. Then she unfolded the letter. "I don't know what you're trying to tell me," she said quietly. The wind answered only with moving leaves. "I don't even know if I'm supposed to believe this." Silence, gentle, patient, almost familiar. Eleanor laughed softly. "You always did let silence finish your thoughts." She remained there for nearly an hour. When she finally stood, something caught her eye. A single white feather rested beside the headstone. Perfect. Dry despite the morning dew. She picked it up carefully. Thomas used to collect feathers. Not because they were valuable, because he believed every feather had traveled farther than the bird intended. "You never know where the wind has been," he would say. She slipped the feather inside the folded letter, then walked home. Life continued. At least it appeared to. The bakery still filled Willow Lane with the smell of fresh bread before sunrise. Children still raced bicycles along the narrow sidewalks after school. Mr. Whitaker still argued with pigeons every afternoon outside the post office. Nothing had changed, except Eleanor now watched every morning differently. She no longer opened the front door simply to greet the day. She looked first toward the mailbox. Empty. Monday, empty. Tuesday, Wednesday, nothing. She almost felt foolish. Perhaps the letter had been only one impossible moment. Perhaps miracles, if they existed at all, were never meant to repeat. By the end of September, the following year, she had nearly convinced herself of exactly that. Then October arrived. The air cooled. The impatient maple turned gold. And on the first quiet morning, the mailbox door stood slightly open. Eleanor did not hurry this time. Somehow she already knew. Inside waited another envelope. Same cream-colored paper, same careful handwriting, same impossible absence of stamp and address. Only her name, Eleanor. She carried it inside before opening it. This letter was longer. "My dearest Eleanor, another autumn has found you. I hope you remembered to trim the roses before the frost. You always waited too long because you hated cutting away anything still trying to bloom. You once told me that kindness sometimes meant leaving broken things alone. You were wrong about roses, but wonderfully right about people. I hope someone still makes you laugh unexpectedly. I hope you still read beside the window when it rains. And I hope, though I know how stubborn you can be, that you have forgiven yourself. There are burdens time was never asking you to carry. I'll write again next autumn." Always, Thomas Eleanor lowered the page slowly. One sentence remained echoing inside her. "I hope you have forgiven yourself." Her hands began to tremble. Because there had been one thing. Only one. Something she had never spoken aloud. Not even after 24 years. The morning Thomas died had begun with an argument. Not a cruel one. Not the kind that destroys marriages. The ordinary kind. Small, forgettable, which somehow made remembering it worse. Thomas wanted to drive into town despite feeling tired. She insisted he should rest. He laughed. She grew impatient. Finally, she said, "You're impossible." He smiled. "I've heard that before." "I mean it." "So do I." He kissed her forehead anyway, then left. The heart attack happened less than an hour later. For years, Eleanor believed those had been the final words she gave him. "You're impossible." Not, "I love you." Not, "Be careful." Not even, "See you soon." Only frustration. Only ordinary life. For 24 years, she replayed that morning until memory itself became worn thin. If only she had stopped him. If only she had spoken differently. If only... The letter rested quietly in her lap. There are burdens time was never asking you to carry. Tears slipped silently down her face. Because those were exactly the words Thomas would have chosen. Not dramatic, not poetic. Simply true. She looked toward the kitchen window, where autumn sunlight spilled gently across the floor. For the first time in longer than she could remember, the memory of that morning did not end with the argument. It continued. She remembered him smiling, remembered the kiss on her forehead, remembered him turning once more at the garden gate and waving. Somehow, she had forgotten the wave. Eleanor sat by the kitchen window until the tea beside her had grown completely cold. Outside, the impatient maple released its first golden leaf of the season. It drifted slowly through the air before settling on the garden path. For years, she had believed memory worked like a photograph, fixed, unchanging. But perhaps memory was more like autumn, each year revealing something different beneath the same familiar branches. She had remembered the argument. She had remembered the ambulance. She had remembered the hospital room filled with white walls and impossible silence. Yet somehow, she had forgotten the wave. Thomas had turned at the gate, lifted one hand, smiled, and waved. Not goodbye. Simply, "See you later." She closed her eyes. How many beautiful moments had grief quietly hidden beneath the heavier ones? The third letter arrived exactly 1 year later. By then, Eleanor no longer feared opening the mailbox. Instead, she welcomed October with a quiet anticipation she could never fully explain. The village noticed she smiled more often. Mrs. Carter at the bakery said, "You look lighter this autumn." Eleanor only smiled. "I think I finally remembered something." Mrs. Carter laughed politely, assuming she meant her shopping list. Some things were too gentle to explain. The envelope waited exactly where she expected it. Cream-colored, no stamp, no return address, only one familiar word. Eleanor. She carried it inside. This time, she lit the small candle Thomas had once carved by hand during a rainy holiday many years before. The flame flickered softly across the table. Then she unfolded the letter. "My dearest Eleanor, if you are reading this, then another year has quietly passed between us. I hope the little robin still visits before sunrise. I hope the roses forgave you for trimming them. And I hope you have begun forgiving yourself too. Do you remember what you once asked me? We were sitting beside the river. You were worried about growing old. You asked, what if one of us has to continue alone? I answered too quickly. I said, you won't be alone. At the time, I thought I meant memories. I understand now. I meant something much larger. Love is a strange traveler. It refuses to obey clocks. It ignores calendars. It wanders quietly through ordinary mornings. waiting to be noticed. If you have laughed this year, I was there. If you stood beneath the maple tree, I was there. If you watched the first snowfall, I was there. Not because I never left, but because love never truly learns how. Do not spend your remaining years looking behind you. There is still beauty ahead. Promise me you'll keep walking toward it. Promise me you'll notice the birds, the rain, the flowers that bloom when no one is watching. Promise me you'll keep making tea in the blue kettle, even though you always let it steep too long. Promise me you'll continue living, not because life became easier, but because it remained beautiful. I'll write again next autumn. Always, Thomas. Eleanor held the final page against her heart. She did not cry immediately. Instead, she smiled. A slow smile. The kind that arrives only after sorrow has finally found somewhere gentle to rest. She looked toward the blue kettle sitting quietly upon the stove. Thomas had teased her about it for nearly 40 years. You make tea strong enough to wake mountains. She laughed aloud. The empty kitchen answered with sunlight. That afternoon, she walked to the cemetery. Not carrying lilies this time, only the 3 letters. The oak tree above Thomas's grave had grown wider over the years, its branches stretching across the hill like open arms. She sat beside the stone. I brought your letters, she whispered. A breeze moved through the leaves. She unfolded each one carefully, then read them aloud. Every word, every pause, every impossible sentence. When she finished, she remained silent for a long while. Finally, she spoke. I've spent 26 years talking to you. She smiled. And today, it finally feels like you've answered. The wind carried another white feather across the grass. It landed gently beside the letters. Eleanor laughed softly. You always did have excellent timing. Winter came, then spring. The roses bloomed brighter than they had in years. The robin returned. Children continued racing bicycles along Willow Lane. Life, wonderfully ordinary, refused to stop. One afternoon, a little girl knocked on Eleanor's front door. She couldn't have been older than 8. Mrs. Brooks? Yes. My teacher said you know lots of stories. Eleanor smiled. I know a few. Would you tell me one? She looked toward the living room where the 3 letters rested inside the wooden box. Then back at the little girl. Come in. The child climbed onto the old sofa. Eleanor made 2 cups of hot chocolate. One large, one very small. What story would you like? The girl thought carefully. The happiest one. Eleanor looked out the window. The impatient maple was green again. Summer birds filled its branches. She smiled. I think I know exactly the story. And she began. Not with death, not with grief, not with impossible letters. She began with a young man planting 2 maple trees because he believed autumn should always arrive twice. She told the story of a woman who insisted rain smelled different beside the river. She told the story of 2 people who laughed more than they argued, who forgave more than they complained, who built an ordinary life so full of small kindnesses that even time struggled to separate them completely. The little girl listened without interrupting. When the story ended, she asked quietly, "Did they live happily ever after?" Eleanor looked toward the garden, toward the maple trees, toward the sky that had carried every season of her life. Then she answered with complete honesty. "Yes," the girl frowned, "but one of them died." Eleanor nodded gently. "She did. Then how is it a happy ending?" Eleanor smiled the way only people who have loved deeply can smile. Because love isn't measured by how long two people stay together. She looked toward the old wooden box resting on the bookshelf. It's measured by how beautifully it continues after one of them is gone. The little girl considered that for a very long time. Then she smiled. I like that ending. So do I. That evening, as the sun disappeared behind the hills, Eleanor walked to the mailbox one last time before going inside. It was empty. She wasn't disappointed. She rested one hand on the weathered green wood and looked up at the quiet evening sky. I'll be all right, she whispered. The wind moved softly through the maple leaves. Somewhere nearby, a robin sang its final song before nightfall. And for the first time in 26 years, Eleanor walked back toward the house without looking over her shoulder. Because some letters are never meant to explain the past. They arrive quietly to remind us that love is not something we leave behind. It is something that keeps finding its way home.